The winter of 1875 brought more than just snow to Silver Peak, Colorado. It brought Margaret Sullivan, a woman who carried hope in her heart and medicine in her bag, to a town that wasn't ready for either. This is the story of a woman who refused to shrink when the world told her she took up too much space, and the mountain man who finally saw her worth through the blizzard of everyone else's judgment. Before we jump in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Boston winter was particularly harsh in 1875, but Margaret Sullivan's kitchen remained warm despite the frost creeping up the window panes. She moved with purpose, her sleeves rolled up, hands working deftly as she ground herbs in a small mortar. At 32, Maggie had resigned herself to a life of spinsterhood, not out of lack of prospects, but out of determination to be more than someone's wife. Her mother's medical books lined the shelves behind her, forbidden knowledge she'd inherited and studied in secret after helping her mother treat the neighborhood's ailments for years. The letter sat open on the table, read so many times its creases had softened. Nathaniel Winters, a successful businessman from Silver Peak, Colorado, sought a bride with genteel sensibilities and a nurturing disposition. His handwriting was precise, his words carefully chosen. He described Silver Peak as a town on the rise, flourishing with the recent silver strike. "You've lost your mind, Maggie," her brother Patrick said, watching as she packed her medical supplies. "You're going to marry a man you've never met? Leave everything behind?" Maggie carefully wrapped her mother's stethoscope in soft cloth. "I've spent my life being told I can't practice medicine because I'm a woman. Out west, they need healers more than they need traditions." What she didn't tell Patrick was that Nathaniel's letters had mentioned frequent accidents at the mine and no doctor within 20 miles. She had written to him about her nursing experience, carefully editing out her more assertive qualities. He had responded enthusiastically. "Boston is suffocating me," she said instead. "I want mountains, Patrick. I want sky." Her brother sighed, recognizing the familiar stubborn set of her jaw. "At least he sounds educated. Better than that butcher's son who couldn't stop staring at your—" "Patrick!" he grinned. "Just saying you've turned down better prospects for less ridiculous reasons." Snow fell steadily as she boarded the train, her medical bag disguised as a lady's valise, her books hidden among her clothing. The conductor helped her with her trunk, smiling at what he assumed was another bride heading west to tame a frontiersman. If only he knew she wasn't looking to tame anything but disease and injury. The journey west transformed the landscape, from crowded cities to endless prairie, and finally to the jagged silhouettes of the Rocky Mountains. Maggie pressed her face to the window, watching the world expand before her. She had told Nathaniel she would arrive on Wednesday's train. She had even sent a daguerreotype, though not her most flattering one. She had been forthright about her age and her nursing experience, if not about the depths of her knowledge or her unwillingness to set it aside. Silver Peak came into view as the train rounded a bend, a collection of wooden buildings nestled in a valley, surrounded by towering, snow-capped peaks. Smoke curled from chimneys, and the silver mine loomed on the mountainside like a reminder of why the town existed at all. The train whistle shrieked as they pulled into the station. Maggie gathered her things, heart pounding. She stepped onto the platform, the thin mountain air immediately stinging her lungs. Her breath clouded before her as she scanned the few. People waiting. No one approached. The platform emptied as passengers dispersed. Still, Maggie waited, adjusting her hat, straightening her gloves. Perhaps he was merely delayed. She sat on her trunk as snowflakes began to drift down, dusting her dark blue traveling coat. An hour passed. The station master emerged from his office looking concerned. "Ma'am, are you waiting for someone?" "Mr. Nathaniel Winters," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "He was to meet me." The station master's face changed. Winters? His office is just down the street. Want me to send a boy to fetch him? Maggie squared her shoulders. No, thank you. I'll find him myself. She wasn't about to sit in the cold, waiting for a man who'd forgotten her. The main street of Silver Peak was muddy despite the freezing temperature, the constant traffic keeping the snow from settling. Maggie struggled with her trunk until a passing miner took pity and carried it for her to the address marked Winters Mining Company. The office was warm and well appointed. A clerk looked up from his ledger, surprised. Can I help you, ma'am? I'm here to see Mr. Winters. I'm Margaret Sullivan. The clerk's eyes widened slightly. Oh, the Boston lady. Yes, one moment. He disappeared through a door, and hushed voices filtered through before he returned. Mr. Winters will see you now. Nathaniel Winters was tall and precisely dressed, not a hair out of place despite the frontier setting. His office spoke of wealth, a large desk, maps of mining claims on the walls, a glass cabinet containing ore samples. He stood as she entered but didn't move to greet her. Miss Sullivan. His voice was cool, his eyes assessing her in a way that made her skin crawl. I apologize for not meeting your train. Business matters detained me. Maggie stood straight, refusing to be diminished. I understand. Silver Peak seems to be thriving under your management. Indeed, he gestured to a chair. Please sit. She did, arranging her skirts with deliberate care. Your letters painted such a vivid picture of the town. I'm eager to see more of it. Nathaniel sat behind his desk, creating a barrier between them. Yes, well, about that. He cleared his throat. I feel I must be direct, Miss Sullivan. You are not what I anticipated. The air in the room seemed to thicken. In what way, Mr. Winters? You mentioned your nursing experience, but you failed to convey the forcefulness of your character. He tapped her letters on his desk. And while your daguerreotype was accurate in features, it did not capture your full presence. Maggie's cheeks burned. I see. A mining town requires women of a certain pliable nature. Men work dangerous jobs, Miss Sullivan. They need gentle comfort at home, not, he gestured vaguely at her entire being, opinions. She sat perfectly still, her heart hammering against her ribs. You advertised for a bride, Mr. Winters, not a servant. His expression hardened. I advertised for a woman who understands her place. And where might that be? Not questioning me in my own office. He stood. I'm sorry you've traveled so far for nothing, Miss Sullivan, but I don't believe you would. Suit Silver Peak, or me. Maggie rose, dignity intact, despite the humiliation burning through her. No, Mr. Winters, I don't believe I would suit you at all. Good day. She walked out with her head high, not allowing herself to falter until the door closed behind her. Outside, snow was falling more heavily, and the weight of her situation pressed down on her. She had sold her possessions, given up her rooms. In Boston, spent nearly all her savings on train fare, and now stood alone in a strange town with nowhere to go. The station master informed her the next train east wouldn't arrive for 3 days. With little choice, Maggie made her way to the Wanderers Inn, a modest boarding house at the edge of town. The proprietress, a widow named Mrs. Abernathy, took one look at Maggie's face and knew. Another one of Winter's disappointments, she said flatly. That man collects broken engagements like some collect stamps. She showed Maggie to a small room with slanted ceilings and a narrow bed. It's not much, but it's clean. How much? Maggie asked, counting her remaining funds in her head. First night's free, Mrs. Abernathy said firmly. Call it women's solidarity. That night, Maggie sat on the edge of her bed, staring out the window at the snow-covered mountains, glowing silver in the moonlight. She had come seeking a new life, and in less than a day, that dream had shattered. But as she unpacked her medical bag, running her fingers over the tools her mother had taught her to use, something hardened inside her. She hadn't come just for marriage. She had come to heal, to work, to breathe free air, and no man, especially not one as small-minded as Nathaniel Winters, would send her home defeated. Morning brought no relief from Maggie's predicament. Over a simple breakfast in the boarding house dining room, she heard whispers. Word traveled quickly in small towns, and by the eggs and toast, everyone knew that Nathaniel Winters had rejected another mail-order bride. Heard she's too bossy, one miner whispered to another. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Too educated for her own good. Shame, his companion replied. She's got a fine... Mrs. Abernathy slammed a coffee pot down on their table. That'll be enough of that. Eat your breakfast and get to work. Maggie pretended not to hear, but her knuckles were white around her fork. She had 3 days until the train east. 3 days to decide if she was retreating or staying to fight. After breakfast, she walked through town, taking stock of her surroundings. Silver Peak was larger than it had appeared from the train. Perhaps 500 souls, with all the establishments a mining town needed, saloons and gambling halls. For the miners, a general store, a small church, an assayer's office, and several boarding houses. What it notably lacked was a doctor's shingle. At the general store, Maggie purchased a newspaper and scanned the advertisements. Nothing seeking medical help, but plenty of odd jobs for men. Women's work was assumed, not advertised. "You're Winter's Boston lady," the shopkeeper said. Not a question. "You staying or going?" "I haven't decided," Maggie answered cautiously. The man nodded thoughtfully. "Town could use a woman with skills. My wife's expecting our 4th, and the midwife's got arthritis, something fierce." Hope flickered briefly, then, "Winters won't like it if you stay. He likes to control who settles here, owns half the buildings, has interests in most businesses." "I don't particularly care what Mr. Winters likes," Maggie replied, perhaps too sharply. The shopkeeper's eyebrows rose. "No wonder he sent you packing," but there was admiration in his voice. As she turned to leave, the door burst open. A miner rushed in, face pale beneath the grime. "There's been a collapse at the South Tunnel. Men trapped," the shopkeeper paled. "Dr. Foster's away in Denver." Without thinking, Maggie stepped forward. "I'm a nurse. I can help." Both men turned to her, surprise evident. The miner hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Better than nothing. Come quick." Maggie grabbed her medical bag from the boarding house and hurried to the mine. A crowd had gathered at the entrance to the south tunnel, where workers were already clearing debris. The foreman looked at her skeptically when she identified herself. "A woman doctor." "I don't think—" "Nurse," she corrected, though it was a lie by omission. "And unless you have someone more qualified, I suggest you let me examine the injured." As they're brought out, 4 miners were eventually freed from the collapse. 2 had minor injuries, 1 was unconscious with a head wound, and the 4th had a badly broken leg. Maggie worked efficiently, directing the miners to help hold the injured still, sending boys running for hot water and clean cloth from the company office. She had just finished setting the broken leg when a hush fell over the crowd. "Nathaniel." Winters pushed his way forward, his face darkening when he saw Maggie kneeling beside his injured employee. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. Maggie didn't look up, continuing to secure the splint. "Medical attention, Mr. Winters. Something. Your mind clearly needs more regularly." Murmurs rippled through the gathered miners. Winters' face flushed with anger. "This is not appropriate work for a lady. You're causing a spectacle." "These men needed help," she replied, standing finally to face him. "Would you have preferred I stand aside wringing my hands while they suffered?" "I would prefer you on tomorrow's stage out of town," he said coldly. A large miner stepped forward. "Begging your pardon, Mr. Winters, but she saved Harlan's leg. Doc Foster would have taken it clean off." Others murmured agreement. Winters looked around, seemingly realizing he was losing the crowd's sympathy. With a tight smile, he said, "Of course, we're grateful for Miss Sullivan's emergency assistance, but Silver Peak requires proper medical care, not amateur nursing." Maggie felt the words like a slap. Everything she had learned, every patient she had treated alongside her mother, dismissed as amateur. "I'll be on tomorrow's stage," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I recognize when I'm not welcome." She gathered her supplies with deliberate care, not allowing her hands to shake until she was alone in her room at the boarding house. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself 5 minutes of pure, burning rage. Not at Nathaniel Winters, men like him were common enough, but at a world that would rather let minors die than allow a woman to heal them. When her 5 minutes were up, she splashed cold water on her face and began to pack. As she folded her shirtwaists, a knock came at the door. Mrs. Abernathy stood there with the injured miner's wife and the general store owner's pregnant spouse. "We heard what you did at the mine," Mrs. Abernathy said without preamble, "and we've come to ask you to stay." "Mr. Winters made his position clear," Maggie replied. "Nathaniel Winters doesn't own this town, no matter what he thinks," said the miner's wife fiercely. "My Jacob would have lost his leg or worse without you." The pregnant woman stepped forward. "I'm scared of birthing with old Mrs. Fowler. Her hands shake so bad she can barely hold a spoon, let alone catch a baby." Maggie looked at the three women, then back at her half-packed trunk. "Even if I stayed, where would I practice? How would I live?" Mrs. Abernathy smiled slyly. "There's a little cabin at the edge of town. Used to be the assayer's place before the new office was built. It's been sitting empty. Needs work, but it's solid. Has a front room that could serve as a surgery." "Whose property is it?" The women exchanged glances. "Technically, the mining company's," Mrs. Abernathy admitted. "But Winters never visits. That side of town, too close to the common folk. So I'd be squatting on his property while defying his wishes." Maggie shook her head. "That seems unwise." "Sometimes wisdom isn't what's needed," the miner's wife said simply. "Sometimes it's courage." Maggie looked out the window at the mountains, their peaks disappearing into low clouds heavy with snow. She had come here for a new beginning, for the chance to practice her healing openly. Did it matter if it came with a husband's approval or without it? "I'll need supplies," she said finally, "and help repairing the cabin before winter truly sets in." The women's faces broke into smiles. "You'll have it," they promised. That night, as word spread through town that the Boston lady was staying to be their healer, Nathaniel Winters sat in his office drafting an eviction notice. The town would soon learn who truly held power in Silver Peak, and Margaret Sullivan would learn what happened to women who didn't know their place. The abandoned assayer's cabin was worse than Maggie had expected. Drafty, with a sagging roof and windows that rattled in their frames. But it had a solid stone fireplace, 2 rooms, and enough space in the front room for a table that could serve as both examination surface and desk. The women of Silver Peak arrived in a steady stream that first day, bringing what they could. Spare blankets, dishes, firewood, a rocking chair with a mended leg. By nightfall, the cabin was habitable, if not comfortable. Maggie arranged her medical supplies carefully on shelves a miner had installed, placing her mother's books prominently on the desk. "First thing tomorrow, we'll patch that roof," said Samuel Wilson, the blacksmith, who had appeared with his tools and an unexpected knowledge of carpentry. "Can't have our doctor catching her death from a leaky ceiling." "I'm not a doctor," Maggie reminded him, though the words tasted false on her tongue. Samuel raised an eyebrow. "You set Jacob Miller's leg better than Doc Foster ever could, and you saved Harlan's life with that quick stitching. What folks call you doesn't change what you are." The next morning, Maggie woke to the sound of hammering. Through frost-edged windows, she saw Samuel on the roof with 2 other men, laying new shingles. More townspeople arrived throughout the Day. Miners' wives bringing stew and bread, children carrying kindling, the general store owner's wagon loaded with supplies on credit until you get established. Maggie was overwhelmed by the generosity. "Why are you all helping me? You barely know me." Martha Jenkins, the store owner's wife, rested a hand on her rounded belly. "When you live in the shadow of a mountain that can bury men alive, you learn to recognize what's valuable. Nathaniel Winters sees us as tools to enrich himself. You see us as people worth saving." By week's end, Maggie had treated her first official patients. A child with croup, a miner with a crushed finger, a young woman with a mysterious rash. She accepted payment in whatever form it came. Coins when available, but more often eggs, firewood, venison, or promises of future labor. It wasn't the life she had imagined when boarding the train in Boston, but as she wrote in her journal by candlelight, she felt something she hadn't expected: freedom. In Boston, she had hidden her medical knowledge, assisting her mother in secret. Here, despite Winter's disapproval, she practiced openly. The reckoning came sooner than expected. On Monday morning, the town's lone lawman, Sheriff Greaves, arrived with an eviction notice. "Mr. Winters says you're trespassing on company property," he said apologetically. "Says you need to be out by sundown." Maggie read the notice carefully. "I don't suppose there's any point in arguing the legality of this." The sheriff shuffled uncomfortably. "Winters pays the judge's salary, same as mine." "I see." She folded the notice neatly. "Please inform Mr. Winters I'll need a few days to make arrangements." He was quite specific about sundown, the sheriff insisted. "And I am quite specific about not abandoning patients mid-treatment," Maggie replied firmly. "I have a boy coming in tomorrow to have stitches removed and a pregnant woman due for examination. Unless Mr. Winters plans to drag me out bodily, which would make for interesting gossip back east, I imagine, I will need until week's end." Sheriff Greaves seemed to weigh his options before nodding reluctantly. "I'll tell him you're being reasonable, but be prepared, Miss Sullivan. Nathaniel Winters isn't known for compromise." After the sheriff left, Maggie sank into her rocking chair, the eviction notice clutched in her hand. She had known this was coming, had expected resistance, but the reality of being forced out struck harder than anticipated. A knock at the door revealed Martha Jenkins, face flushed from the cold. "I saw the sheriff," she said, stepping inside. "Winters is making his move, isn't he?" Maggie nodded. "I'm to be out by week's end, and that's with negotiation." Martha's lips pressed into a thin line. "The man's determined to run this town like his personal kingdom." She paced the small room, then stopped suddenly. "The Hayes place." "Pardon?" "Thomas Hayes has a cabin up beyond the North Ridge. It's on his own land, not company property. He guides hunting parties, helps people cross the mountain passes when they're open. Keeps to himself mostly since his wife died." Maggie shook her head. "I can't impose on a stranger." "It's not imposing if you offer fair trade," Martha said practically. "The man lives like a hermit. Probably hasn't had a decent meal or clean shirt in months. You could tend to his needs, and he'd give you shelter beyond winter's reach." "Tend to his needs," Maggie repeated with raised eyebrows. "I'm not looking to become anyone's housekeeper or anything else." Martha laughed. "Not like that. Though Tom's a sight better than Winters, I'll say that much. I just meant an arrangement, your healing for his shelter." It wasn't ideal, but it was better than returning east in defeat. "How do I find this Mr. Hayes?" "He comes to town for supplies every Wednesday. Has a shop too for his guiding business. You can't miss him. Tall fellow, beard like a grizzly, walks like he's still on a mountain trail even on flat ground." Wednesday found Maggie waiting outside Hayes Guiding and Supply, a modest establishment wedged between the barber shop and a saloon. The sign above the door featured a crude painting of a mountain alongside the words, "Safe Passage Guaranteed." When Thomas Hayes arrived, Maggie immediately understood Martha's description. He towered over most men in town, with broad shoulders and a beard that indeed resembled a grizzly's. He moved with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to difficult terrain, and his eyes, startlingly blue against his weathered face, took in his surroundings with quiet alertness. Maggie stepped forward. "Mr. Hayes, I'm Margaret Sullivan." He studied her for a moment. "The Boston nurse Winters tried to run off. Heard you're living in the old assayer's cabin." "Not for much longer," Maggie replied. "Mr. Winters has made his objections official." Hayes unlocked his shop door. "And you're telling me this because I'm told you have a cabin beyond the reach of the mining company's influence." He gestured for her to enter the shop, which was filled with equipment for mountain travel: snowshoes, picks, ropes, maps, and supplies. "I do. What's that got to do with you?" Direct approach seemed best. "I need a place to live and practice medicine, somewhere Nathaniel Winters can't interfere." Hayes leaned against a counter. "My cabin's not a hospital, Miss Sullivan." "I don't need a hospital. I need a room with a fireplace and a door people can knock on when they need help. And what do I get in return?" "Medical care. For yourself and your clients. I understand mountain travel comes with risks." His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. "Had a client break his ankle last season. Took 3. Meant to carry him down. Would have been simpler to set it on the spot. I can do that. I've set bones, treated frostbite, delivered babies, stitched wounds. Nearest neighbor's 2 miles away. Winters doesn't ride out that far, but it's isolated. Hard living." Maggie straightened. "Mr. Hayes, I grew up watching my mother treat patients in our kitchen while my father drank away what little money we had. I've worked since I was 12. I've faced down men who thought a woman had no business knowing what's inside a human body. I can handle isolation and hard living." For the first time, Hayes's expression softened slightly. "Your mother taught you medicine?" "Everything she knew. She was a midwife, but she could do far more when needed. As can I." He considered her for a long moment. "Got a spare room built for my daughter before the fever took her and her mother 3 winters back. Never had the heart to use it for anything else. It's yours if you want it. Won't be comfortable as town, though." The words were gruff, but Maggie heard what lay beneath. The wound still raw after 3 years. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Hayes." "Tom," he corrected. "If we're to be living under the same roof, might as well use my name." "Then I'm Maggie," she replied. "And thank you. When can I move my things?" "Friday. Taking a hunting party up until then." He hesitated. "Winters. Won't like it, man holds grudges." Maggie smiled grimly. "So do I, Mr. Hayes, so do I." When Nathaniel Winters learned of Maggie's arrangement with the mountain guide, his anger was cold and calculating. "Hayes lives like a savage," he told anyone who would listen. "No place for a supposedly genteel woman. They'll be snowed in together all winter. Imagine the impropriety." But the residents of Silver Peak, who had come to value Maggie's skills and direct manner, were less concerned with propriety than with keeping their healer accessible. And if Nathaniel Winters disapproved, well, that was just another point in her favor for many. By Friday, when Tom returned from his hunting expedition, everything Maggie owned was packed and ready. Samuel Wilson provided his wagon to transport her belongings up the winding mountain trail to Tom's cabin. The Hayes cabin was larger than Maggie had expected, built of solid logs with a stone chimney and a wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides. It perched on a ridge overlooking the valley, Silver Peak visible as a cluster of buildings far below. "It's beautiful," Maggie breathed, taking in the view. Tom shrugged. "Catherine picked the spot, said she wanted to be able to see the stars, without the mining company's smoke getting in the way." Inside, the cabin was simply furnished but well constructed. A large main room served as kitchen, dining area, and living space, with a massive stone fireplace at one end. Tom showed her to a small bedroom off the main room. "Was meant for Lily," he said quietly. "Never got to use it." The room was painted a soft yellow, with shelves built into one wall and a small bed with a carved headboard. A window looked east, toward the mountains. "It's perfect," Maggie said. "Thank you." Tom nodded once. "I'll be gone most days. Got parties to guide, traps to check. You'll have your privacy." "And you'll have yours," she assured him. "I'll set up my practice things. In the main room when you're away, move them aside when you return." It wasn't ideal, and it certainly wasn't what she'd expected when leaving Boston. But as Maggie unpacked her medical books and arranged her supplies, she felt something settle in her chest. This strange, quiet mountain man had offered her sanctuary when Nathaniel Winters would have driven her away. It was a beginning, different than planned, but a beginning nonetheless. That night, as she lay in the small bed meant for a child who never grew up, Maggie wrote in her journal, "I came to Silver Peak seeking a husband and found instead a battle. Perhaps that's what I was truly looking for all along. Not a man to define me, but a place to define myself." Outside, snow began to fall, the first heavy storm of winter, sealing the mountain paths and binding her to this strange new life she had chosen. Winter descended on the mountains with icy determination. Snow piled in drifts against the cabin. Walls and the trail to town became treacherous, requiring snowshoes for even the most routine journey. Maggie quickly established a rhythm to her days. When Tom was guiding winter hunting parties or checking his trap lines, she used the main room of the cabin as her surgery, receiving patients who braved the mountain path seeking her help. When Tom returned, she cleared her medical equipment, away, respecting his space. They spoke little at first, existing in parallel rather than together. Tom would leave before dawn and return after dark, sometimes bringing fresh game for their table. Maggie would have a hot meal waiting, not out of obligation but practical courtesy. They both needed to eat, and it made sense to share the work. Gradually, silences became less strained. Tom began to linger after dinner, carving wood by the fire, while Maggie read her medical texts or wrote in her journal. Occasionally, he would ask about a patient or offer advice on treating exposure to cold. Maggie, in turn, inquired about his knowledge of medicinal plants and was surprised by his extensive understanding of the mountain's natural remedies. "My mother was Cherokee," he explained one evening, demonstrating how to prepare a pine needle tea rich in vitamins. "She knew things about healing the government doctors dismissed. Catherine, my wife, she wrote them down before the fever took her." He showed Maggie a small leather-bound book filled with careful drawings of plants, alongside descriptions in a delicate hand. It was the most personal thing he had shared, and Maggie recognized the gesture for what it was. A tentative bridge across the gulf between them. One bitter January night, as wind howled around the cabin corners, a pounding at the door startled them both. Tom opened it to find Samuel Wilson, the blacksmith, supporting a half-frozen miner. "Cave-in at the new tunnel," Samuel gasped, his breath clouding. "Bad one, too many injured for Doc Foster to handle alone. He sent me for Maggie." Tom didn't hesitate. "I'll harness the sled. We can be there in 20 minutes if we take the West Ridge Trail." He moved with efficient purpose, preparing his largest sled and harnessing his strongest horses, while Maggie gathered supplies. Within minutes, they were racing down the mountain, Tom's expert handling keeping them from disaster on the icy slopes. The scene at the mine entrance was chaos. Lanterns illuminated men carrying injured miners from the tunnel. Dr. Eleanor Foster, recently returned from Denver, moved among them, face grim with exhaustion. When she saw Maggie, relief flooded her features. "Sullivan, thank God. I've got 3 critical and more coming. Can you handle the crush injuries while I deal with the head trauma? Maggie nodded, already assessing the wounded. I'll need hot water, clean cloths, whiskey for sterilizing. Done, Tom said, and disappeared to arrange it before Maggie could respond. For hours they worked in the company office, converted to a makeshift hospital. Maggie treated crushed limbs, puncture wounds, and broken bones. Tom assisted without being asked, holding men down when necessary, fetching supplies, even helping Maggie amputate a miner's hopelessly mangled arm when no other option remained. Dawn was breaking when they finished with the last patient. 9 men had died in the collapse. 14 were injured but would live. Maggie's skirts were stained with blood, her hair escaping its pins, her face etched with fatigue. Dr. Foster, equally exhausted, clasped her hand. Couldn't have saved as many without you, the older woman said. I was wrong to doubt your skills. Nathaniel Winters appeared, immaculate despite the hour, surveying the rows of injured men with a calculating eye. When he saw Maggie, his expression hardened. I don't recall authorizing your presence, Miss Sullivan. Before Maggie could respond, Dr. Foster stepped forward. I authorized it, Mr. Winters, and I'll continue to do so. Miss Sullivan has medical knowledge this town needs. A woman playing a doctor, a healer, Tom interrupted, his quiet voice cutting through Winters' objection, who just saved the lives of 6 of your men. Winters turned, noticing Tom for the first time. Hayes, should have known you'd involve yourself, always were soft on lost causes. Tom's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Careful, Winters. Maggie stepped between them. Mr. Winters, I understand your objection to my presence, but surely today, of all days, we can set aside personal grievances. These men need continued care. Winters looked at the miners, many watching the exchange from their makeshift beds. Even in his anger, he was shrewd enough to recognize the political reality. The town was watching, and the town had chosen sides. Very well, he said coldly. Dr. Foster may call on your assistance when necessary, but understand this arrangement does not constitute my approval or employment. After he left, Dr. Foster shook her head. That man would let pride kill half the town. Tom helped Maggie gather her remaining supplies. He's a small man, pretending to be big. The mountain has a way of revealing true measure. As they rode back up to the cabin, the rising sun painting the snow-covered peaks gold and pink, Maggie felt something shift between them. They had worked together as a seamless team during the crisis, moving in wordless coordination as if they'd done so for years. Thank you, she said as they unloaded the sled. For your help tonight. You didn't have to stay. Tom looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. You have steady hands, even when that boy was screaming and blood was everywhere. Never seen anything like it. My mother taught me early, panic helps no one. Feel it later, act now. He nodded slowly. Catherine was the same way. When Lily took sick, Catherine didn't cry, didn't rage, just fought for 3 days straight without sleeping. Summer faded into autumn with a painter's touch, turning the aspens that surrounded their mountain home into shimmering gold. The Hayes cabin, once a place of solitary existence for Tom, now bustled with life and purpose. Maggie had transformed the front room into an efficient examination area during the day, while still keeping it a warm, welcoming home in the evenings. Patients came regularly, miners with injuries, mothers with feverish children, elders with aching joints, all making the journey up the mountain trail to see Doc Hayes, as she was now universally known throughout Silver Peak. Tom expanded the porch that wrapped around the cabin, adding a covered waiting area for patients during inclement weather. His guiding business flourished alongside Maggie's medical practice, his reputation for safety and knowledge of the mountains spreading beyond Silver Peak to neighboring settlements. Often, he would return from a guiding expedition with a patient. For Maggie, someone injured on the trail, or a family from a remote homestead needing medical attention they couldn't find elsewhere. "I'm beginning to think you're drumming up business for me," Maggie teased one evening after Tom had returned. With a trapper whose frost-bitten toes needed treatment, Tom's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Just making sure people know where to find the best doctor in the territory." "The only doctor in 20 miles, you mean?" "The best doctor," he repeated firmly, and kissed her with a certainty that still made her heart flutter, even after months of marriage. As the days grew shorter and the first snow dusted the highest peaks, Maggie and Tom began making plans for the winter ahead. The town building that had been deeded to them, Nathaniel Winter's parting gesture of apology, was nearly ready. Samuel Wilson had crafted iron filigree signs for both businesses, and Martha Jenkins had sewn heavy curtains for the windows. Come spring, when the mountain passes were clear again, they would move their practices into town, maintaining the cabin as their private home. "It will be strange," Maggie admitted as they discussed the arrangement over dinner, "having separate spaces for living and working after all this time." Tom nodded thoughtfully. "Might be nice, though. Leave the work behind at day's end. Have this place just for us." He paused, eyes meeting hers across the table. "For family." The word hung between them, weighted with possibility. They hadn't spoken directly of children, though the topic hovered at the edges of their conversations. Tom had lost a child. Maggie had delivered many, but never held one of her own. It was tender ground for both of them. "Do you want that?" Maggie asked carefully. "After Lily." Tom was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting to the window where the first evening stars were appearing. "Didn't think I did. For a long time, the idea felt like betrayal." He looked back at her, his expression open in the way it only was when they were alone. "But now, seeing you with the Palmer twins, the way you are with children who come for treatment, I find myself wondering what our child might be like." Maggie reached across the table to take his hand. "I'd like that. A child with your eyes. And perhaps a bit less of your stubbornness." His laugh filled the room, deep and warm. "My stubbornness? Have you met yourself, Margaret Sullivan Hayes?" The arrival of winter brought the isolation they had come to appreciate. Days when snow made the trail impassable, giving them precious time alone together. On those days, they would read by the fire, play chess, or simply talk in the way of people who never tire of learning each other. Tom taught Maggie to carve wood, guiding her hands as she created simple figures of animals and birds. She taught him more advanced medical techniques, pleased by his natural aptitude and steady hands. As the first major blizzard of the season enveloped the cabin in swirling white, they lay in bed, listening to the winds howl, wrapped in quilts and each other's warmth. "There's something I need to tell you," Maggie said softly, her head resting on Tom's chest, where she could feel the steady rhythm of his heart. He traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I think we may need to accelerate our plans for the town building." She propped herself up on one elbow to see his face. "I may need a proper surgery sooner than expected." Tom's brow furrowed. "Are you getting more patients than you can handle here?" "No." Maggie smiled, taking his hand and placing it gently on her stomach. "But in about 7 months, I'm going to have a rather important patient who will need my full attention." Understanding dawned slowly across his features, disbelief giving way to wonder. "Maggie, are you saying?" She nodded, watching carefully for his reaction. "I'm sure of it. I've seen the signs enough times in other women." For a moment, Tom was perfectly still, his hand warm against her belly where new life had just begun. Then, to her surprise, tears filled his eyes. Not the grief she had feared might resurface, but a joy so profound It could find expression only in silence and salt water. "I never thought," he began, voice rough with emotion, "never imagined I'd feel this again." Maggie brushed away a tear that had escaped down his weathered cheek. "Are you happy then?" In answer, he gathered her close, his kiss conveying everything. Words could not, joy and fear, memory and hope, endings and beginnings all intertwined. Later, as snow continued to fall and they lay talking of the future, Tom asked, "Will you still want to practice after the baby comes?" It was the question Maggie had been asking herself since she first suspected her condition. In Boston, a female physician with a child would be scandalous, her professional credibility irreparably damaged. But Silver Peak was not Boston, and she was no longer the woman who had arrived on that snowy platform nearly a year ago. "Yes," she said finally. "Perhaps not immediately and perhaps not as many hours, but yes. Being a healer is part of who I am, just as being a guide is part of you." Tom nodded, unsurprised. "Then we'll make it work. The town building has enough space for a small nursery off the surgery. And between your patients and my expeditions, one of us should always be able to be with the child." The calm practicality of his response, the absence of any insistence that motherhood should supplant her calling, confirmed yet again that she had found a rare man indeed. "What was your mother like?" she asked suddenly. Tom spoke often of Catherine and occasionally of his father, but rarely of his Cherokee mother. Tom's expression softened at the question. Strong, gentle with those who needed gentleness, fierce with those who didn't deserve it. She could track game better than any man in the territory and knew every plant that could heal or harm. He touched Maggie's stomach lightly. She would have been proud to see her grandchild delivered by a woman doctor. As winter settled fully, upon the mountains, news of Maggie's pregnancy spread through Silver Peak, carried by patients who noticed her changing figure and her occasional bouts of morning sickness. The town's response was overwhelmingly positive. Gifts appeared at the cabin door, left by miners and townspeople alike. A hand-carved cradle from Samuel Wilson, tiny knitted garments from the wives of miners, preserved fruits and vegetables from Martha Jenkins' root cellar. Dr. Foster made the difficult journey up the mountain trail specifically to examine Maggie, bringing with her the latest medical journals from Denver. "Everything appears normal," the older doctor pronounced after a thorough examination, "though I'd prefer you move to town before your 7th month. The trail will be too dangerous then, and if there are complications, I want you near enough to assist." Maggie agreed, though the thought of leaving their mountain sanctuary earlier than planned brought a twinge of regret. The cabin had become more than just a home. It was where she and Tom had found each other, where they had built a life neither had expected. As if reading her thoughts, Dr. Foster added, "You'll be back here before you know it. Babies have a way of rearranging our plans, but not ending them." The town building progressed rapidly once word of the baby spread. Miners volunteered after their shifts to help with construction, rushing to complete the project before deep winter made work impossible. Tom divided his time between guiding essential expeditions and overseeing the renovations, ensuring the surgery would meet Maggie's exacting standards. By January, as Maggie entered her 4th month, the building was nearly complete. A solid, 2-story structure with the medical practice on the ground floor and Tom's guiding business above. A small apartment behind the surgery would serve as their town residence for the late stages of pregnancy and early weeks after the birth. "It's perfect," Maggie declared as Tom gave her a tour. He had thought of everything. Windows positioned to catch the best light for examinations, shelves built to the right height to prevent her having to stretch or bend, even a special chair designed for her comfort during the later stages of pregnancy. "One more thing," Tom said, leading her to a door she hadn't noticed. It opened onto a small, east-facing room with a single window. The walls were painted the same soft yellow as Lily's unused bedroom in the cabin, but this was clearly a new beginning, not a recreation of the past. A rocking chair stood in one corner, and the cradle Samuel had carved waited in another, ready for its occupant. "Oh, Tom," Maggie whispered, touching the cradle's smooth wood. "I wanted it to feel right," he said simply, "for both of us." February brought unexpected challenges. The winter had been harsh, and supplies in Silver Peak ran low. Fresh food became scarce, and illness spread through the cramped miners' quarters. Maggie worked tirelessly, moving between the nearly completed town surgery and house calls to those too sick to travel. Tom worried about her exhaustion, especially as her pregnancy advanced, but knew better than to suggest she reduce her workload while people needed her. Instead, he took over more of the domestic tasks, ensuring she ate properly and rested when possible. He also began teaching some of the miners' wives basic nursing skills so they could assist Maggie with simpler cases. By March, as the first hints of spring teased the lower valleys, Maggie and Tom made the difficult decision to move temporarily to town. The mountain trails were treacherous with spring melt, making the journey to and from the cabin increasingly dangerous. Maggie was now visibly pregnant, her movements slower, her body adjusting to its changing shape. Their first night in the town apartment felt strange after months in the cabin's familiar embrace. The sounds were different. Distant piano music from the saloon, occasional voices in the street, the clatter of the late freight wagon. Tom found Maggie standing at the window in her nightgown, looking toward the mountains that were invisible in the darkness. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, coming to stand behind her. She leaned back against him, his arms encircling her and their child. "No, just missing our mountain. The quiet. We'll be back there before the aspen leaves unfurl." He rested his chin on the top of her head. "And we'll bring this little one with us." The official opening of Hayes Medical and Guiding was scheduled for April 1st. Dr. Foster had agreed to share her practice with Maggie, handling the more physically demanding cases while Maggie focused on examinations and consultations that accommodated her advancing pregnancy. Tom had spring expeditions booked, mostly supply runs, to outlying settlements and guiding for early hunting parties. They had worked out a careful schedule that ensured one of them would always be available for emergencies. The morning of the opening dawned clear and mild, the kind of spring day that promises warmth without delivering it fully. Maggie dressed carefully in a practical dress, modified to accommodate her growing belly, her hair arranged neatly beneath a lace cap that had been Catherine's. Tom wore a clean shirt and his least worn trousers, his beard trimmed, his hair tamed as much as its wild nature allowed. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm with formal courtesy that made her smile. "As I'll ever be," she replied, taking it. They stepped out onto the sidewalk to find what seemed like half the town gathered before the building. Samuel Wilson stood at the front, holding the iron signs he had crafted for each business. Martha Jenkins was there with a basket that likely contained enough food for everyone present. Miners and their families, shopkeepers, even a few of the saloon girls stood waiting, faces expectant. Maggie felt a moment of shyness, unaccustomed to being the center of such attention. Tom's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm, a silent reassurance. Martha stepped forward. "We thought your opening day deserved a proper celebration. After all, it's not every day Silver Peak gets a new doctor and a proper guide service in one building. And not every day we get to thank the two people who have saved so many of us," added a miner, whose leg Maggie had saved after the tunnel collapse. Samuel presented the signs with pride, one reading Hayes Medical Practice, with a simplified Gaducius, the other Hayes Mountain Guiding, featuring a compass and mountains. They were beautiful works of craftsmanship, the iron worked into elegant shapes that belied their strength and durability. "Speech!" someone called from the back of the crowd. Tom looked at Maggie, eyebrow raised in question. Public speaking had never been his strength. Maggie stepped forward slightly, one hand resting on her belly. "A year ago," she began, her voice clear in the morning air, "I arrived in Silver Peak thinking I knew exactly what my future would hold. I was wrong in nearly every particular." This drew knowing chuckles from the crowd. "But what I found instead was something I couldn't have imagined, a community that values skill and heart above convention, that judges people by their actions rather than their circumstances." She looked at Tom, drawing strength from his steady presence. "My husband and I have been given an extraordinary gift in your acceptance and support. This building, these businesses are our way of returning that gift. Whether you need medical care or safe passage through the mountains, we will be here, not just as doctor and guide, but as neighbors and friends." The crowd's approval was evident in their applause and calls of encouragement. The celebration continued, with Martha's food distributed, children running excitedly through the new building, and a steady stream of well-wishers offering congratulations both on the businesses and the coming baby. By late afternoon, when the last visitors had departed, Maggie sat in her new surgery, momentarily overwhelmed by the day's emotions. Tom found her there, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "What's wrong?" he asked, immediately concerned. She shook her head, smiling through her tears. "Nothing's wrong. That's just it. A year ago I was rejected, alone with nowhere to go. And now..." She gestured at the surgery, at her pregnant form, at him. "Now I have everything I never knew to wish for." Tom knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Not everything," he said softly. "Not yet, but soon." He placed a gentle hand on her rounded belly, and as if in response, there was a definite movement beneath his palm, their child making its presence known. The wonder on Tom's face was something Maggie knew she would remember all her days. Spring advanced rapidly that year, as if making up for winter's lingering grasp. By late April, wildflowers carpeted the lower meadows and the snow line retreated up the mountainsides. The town building served its purpose well. Maggie's practice flourished, with patients coming from as far as 30 miles away to see the woman doctor whose remedies combined traditional medicine with herbal knowledge gleaned from Tom's Cherokee heritage. Tom's guiding business was equally successful. As the mountain passes cleared, demand for his services increased, though he steadfastly refused expeditions that would take him away for more than 2 days. His reputation for safety and knowledge spread, bringing clients from as far away as Denver, businessmen wanting to hunt, scientists studying the mountains, even a famous photographer from New York wishing to capture the Rockies' majesty on film. As May turned to June and Maggie entered her final month of pregnancy, the heat in town became oppressive. The mining operations ran day and night, filling the air with dust and noise. Maggie found herself longing for the cabin's cool elevation and pristine air. "What if we went back to the cabin for the birth?" she suggested one evening as they sat on the small balcony behind their town apartment, seeking relief from the day's heat. Tom looked at her in surprise. "Dr. Foster thought you should stay in town in case of complications." Dr. Foster delivered. 6 babies last month in miners' shacks with dirt floors and no running water," Maggie pointed out. "Our cabin is clean, comfortable, and I know every inch of it. It feels right, Tom. I want our child born in our true home, not in rooms we've barely inhabited." Tom considered her words carefully. He never dismissed her medical judgment, but his protective instincts had grown stronger as her pregnancy advanced. "What about the journey? The trail is still rough in places. We could take it slowly, camp halfway if needed." Maggie leaned forward, earnest in her appeal. "I've delivered enough babies to know I still have time. First babies rarely come early, and I've shown no signs of premature labor." Tom was quiet, weighing the risks against Maggie's evident desire. Finally, he nodded. "If Dr. Foster agrees it's safe, we'll go home." To their surprise, Dr. Foster offered only token resistance to the plan. "The cabin is probably cleaner than half the places I deliver babies," she admitted. "And I can ride up if needed. Samuel's boy can fetch me. But you'll need to prepare for the possibility that you'll be on your own, Tom. Mountain storms don't care about birthing schedules." They made the journey in mid-June, when the mountain was at its most welcoming. Tom insisted Maggie ride their gentlest horse while he led it, carefully guiding them around the rougher sections of trail. They took 2 days for what would normally be a half-day journey, stopping frequently to rest, sleeping under the stars at a level meadow halfway up the mountain. When the cabin finally came into view, Maggie felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It stood as they had left it, solid and welcoming, the afternoon sun glinting off the windows Tom had enlarged over the winter. Wildflowers surrounded it in a riot of color, and the vegetable garden they had planted the previous summer had partly self-seeded, green shoots pushing through the rich soil. "Welcome home," Tom said simply, helping her down from the horse. Inside, everything was exactly as they remembered, though Martha and some of the other women had clearly visited recently. The bed linens were fresh, the pantry stocked with preserves and dried goods, and a vase of wildflowers sat on the table. A note propped against it read simply, "For the 3 of you, with love from Silver Peak." The next 2 weeks passed in peaceful preparation. Tom added finishing touches to the cradle that now sat in their bedroom. Maggie sorted and organized her medical supplies, knowing that soon she would be both doctor and patient. They took slow walks around the property, discussing names, imagining futures, settling into a readiness that was both practical and emotional. As her time drew closer, Maggie found herself increasingly drawn to the porch overlooking the valley. She would sit in the rocking chair Tom had made, watching the changing light on the distant peaks, feeling the occasional flutter and kick of the child within her. It was there that the first pains found her, as dawn broke over the eastern mountains. She sat quietly, counting the minutes between contractions, letting her body tell her its rhythm before waking Tom. When she was certain this was truly the beginning, she went inside. Tom was already awake, building up the fire against the morning. "Jill!" He turned when he heard her, one look at her face telling him everything. "It's time?" he asked, his voice steady despite the flash of fear in his eyes. Maggie nodded. "Early stages yet, but yes, it's begun." What followed was a day unlike any other in their lives together. As Maggie's labor progressed, Tom moved between roles with unwavering focus, boiling water, preparing the bed, massaging her back during contractions, helping her walk when movement eased the pain. All the instructions she had given him in the preceding weeks came back clearly, his mountain guide's memory for detail serving them well. As afternoon faded into evening and her contractions intensified, Maggie found strength in Tom's constancy. He never showed panic, never questioned her knowledge of her own body, even as the labor stretched longer than either had anticipated. "Tell me about Lily," Maggie asked during a brief respite between pains, needing distraction, needing connection, to the child who had come before. Tom, sitting beside her on the bed, looked surprised, but answered without hesitation. She had Catherine's eyes, dark and quick to laugh. My mother's hands, long fingers, always reaching for things. His voice softened with memory. She was fearless, would have been at home on any mountain trail, used to say she was going to be a guide like her father, but better because she was smaller and could fit in caves I couldn't. Maggie smiled through her exhaustion. She sounds wonderful. She was. Tom's hand found hers. And this one will be too. Different, but equally wonderful. As night fell fully, Maggie's labor entered its final, most demanding phase. Tom helped her into the position she had determined would be best, supporting her as she worked with her body's ancient rhythms. Despite her medical knowledge, or perhaps because of it, Maggie surrendered to the process, trusting her instincts and Tom's steady presence. When the moment finally came, it was Tom's hands that caught their child, his voice that broke on a cry of joy as their daughter slipped into the world, pink and perfect, and announcing her arrival with healthy lungs. "She's here," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he placed the infant on Maggie's chest. "Our daughter is here." Maggie looked down at the tiny face, still wrinkled and red from birth, feeling a love so profound it seemed to fill every corner of the cabin. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Tom leaned in, his forehead touching Maggie's, their daughter cradled between them, a family complete in a way neither had dared to imagine when their paths first crossed. Later, after Maggie and the baby had been cleaned and settled comfortably, in bed, Tom brought a cup of the strengthening tea his mother had taught him to make for women after childbirth. "What shall we name her?" he asked, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. Maggie studied their daughter's sleeping face. "I've been thinking about that. What was your mother's name?" "Ayita," Tom replied. "It means first to dance." "And Catherine's middle name?" "Elizabeth." Maggie smiled. "Ayita Elizabeth Hayes. A name that honors both the women who came before her and the heritage that is hers by birth." Tom's eyes shone with approval and something deeper. Perfect. He touched the baby's tiny hand with a finger roughened by mountain winds and ropes. "Welcome to the world, Ayita Elizabeth. You are more loved than you can possibly know." As dawn broke over the mountains once more, painting the cabin in golden light, Maggie watched her husband hold their daughter by the window, pointing out the peaks and valleys that would be her playground, the forests and meadows that would be her schoolroom. In that moment, she thought of all the paths that had led here, the rejection that had forced her to stand alone, the struggle that had revealed her strength, the man who had recognized her value, not despite her fierce independence, but because of it. None of it had been what she expected when stepping off that train in Silver Peak, yet all of it had been exactly what she needed. And if life had taught Maggie Sullivan Hayes anything, it was that the most beautiful journeys often begin with a door closing, forcing us to find the window that was meant for us all along. The mountain seasons passed in gentle rhythm around the Hayes cabin, marking time in their own ancient way. Ayita grew from a small, red-faced newborn into a curious, bright-eyed infant with a shock of dark hair and her father's steady gaze. Maggie marveled at her daughter's tiny perfection, the miniature fingernails, the determined grip, the expressions that crossed her face like weather systems. Tom became a father of remarkable tenderness, carrying Ayita against his chest in a sling fashioned after those his Cherokee mother had used, singing to her in a deep, quiet voice when he thought Maggie was sleeping. By autumn, their routine had settled into a comfortable pattern. 3 days a week, they traveled down to town, where Maggie saw patients in the Hayes medical practice, while Tom conducted business at the guiding office upstairs. The other days were spent at the cabin, where they received only the most urgent cases or those willing to make the journey up the mountain trail. When Tom needed to lead expeditions, Maggie stayed in town with Ayita, often staying with Martha Jenkins, who'd become a devoted honorary grandmother to the child. "She's got your determination," Martha observed one afternoon as 6-month-old Ayita attempted to roll herself across the parlor floor, tiny face scrunched in concentration. "And Tom's patience. Watch how she plans her moves, not just flailing about like most babies." Maggie watched her daughter with a mixture of pride and wonder. "Sometimes I still can't believe she's real, that any of this is real." Martha smiled, knowingly. "Life's like that sometimes. Gives you exactly what you need, even when it looks nothing like what you thought you wanted. As winter approached again, Maggie found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. The cold rejection on that snowy platform seemed to belong to another lifetime. A painful memory transformed into the first step toward true happiness. Nathaniel Winters had left Silver Peak months ago, replaced by a manager who prioritized safety and fair treatment. The town was changing, growing more settled as families put down roots and businesses flourished. Dr. Foster had officially retired, turning her practice entirely over to Maggie, though she still consulted on difficult cases and had become a regular visitor to the Hayes cabin, as much to bounce medical theories off Maggie as to coddle Aita. The two women had developed a deep, professional respect that had blossomed into genuine friendship. "I've been corresponding with a medical college in Denver," Dr. Foster announced during one such visit as they sat drinking tea while snow fell gently outside. "They're interested in your combination of traditional medicine and herbal remedies. Want you to document your treatments and results." Maggie looked up in surprise. "For publication?" "Potentially." Dr. Foster's eyes twinkled. "Imagine that, a woman doctor published in a medical journal. Times are changing, Maggie. Slowly, but they're changing." The prospect of having her medical approaches formally recognized filled Maggie with a quiet pride. She had begun keeping meticulous notes on her treatments, particularly those that incorporated Tom's knowledge of indigenous remedies, finding that the combination often proved more effective than either approach alone. Tom supported her intellectual endeavors wholeheartedly, extending his trapping expeditions to search for specific plants she needed, teaching her their Cherokee names and traditional uses. He built her a special cabinet with dozens of small drawers for her growing collection of dried herbs and medicinal roots, each labeled in her precise handwriting. "My mother would be proud," he said one evening, watching Maggie prepare a cough remedy for a miner's child, using a combination of wild cherry bark and honey infused with pine resin. "She always said the mountain provides everything needed for healing, if only people knew how to look and listen." The winter passed more gently than the previous one, as if the mountains themselves were softening around the growing family. Aita thrived despite the cold, her cheeks round and pink, her eyes brightening when snow fell, reaching toward the window as if trying to catch the flakes. Tom built her a cradle sled that could be pulled behind them on the trail between town and cabin, wrapping her so thoroughly in furs and blankets that only her curious face remained visible. Spring brought Aita's first birthday, celebrated with the entire town in the meeting hall. Samuel Wilson presented her with a rocking horse he had crafted over the winter, its mane and tail made from real horsehair, its saddle a perfect miniature of a mountain guide's tack. The miner's children treated her like a communal little sister, bringing her wildflowers and teaching her to clap her hands. By then she was taking her first wobbly steps, fiercely independent even in this, refusing help and pulling herself up, time after time when she fell. "Just like her mother," Tom murmured, watching Aita determinedly navigate the room, graciously accepting steadying hands from the children, but clearly preferring to manage on her own. That summer brought new changes to Silver Peak and to the Hayes family. The railroad company announced plans to extend a spur line directly to the town, recognizing its growing importance as both a mining center and a gateway to the high country. Property values soared overnight, and with them, opportunities. The Hayes Medical Practice and Guiding Service found themselves busier than ever, with new settlers seeking medical care and Eastern tourists eager to experience the Rocky Mountains with a reputable guide. Maggie hired an assistant, Sarah Miller, a miner's daughter with quick intelligence and steady hands, who had been shadowing Maggie for months, absorbing medical knowledge with remarkable aptitude. Tom took on an apprentice guide as well. Robert Wilson, Samuel's 16-year-old son, who had inherited his father's craftsmanship along with a natural affinity for the mountains. "We're building something lasting here," Maggie remarked one evening as they reviewed the week's schedules and earnings, "not just for ourselves but for others." Tom nodded thoughtfully. "For Aita too. She'll have choices we never had growing up." The thought of their daughter's future often occupied their quiet moments. They both wanted her to have every opportunity: education, independence, the freedom to choose her own path. But they also wanted her to value the mountains that had brought them together, to understand both her father's Cherokee heritage and her mother's hard-won wisdom. As Aita's second birthday approached, an unexpected visitor arrived in Silver Peak. Thomas Hayes was leading a hunting party back to town when he encountered a carriage on the road. An unusual sight on the rough mountain trails where most travelers used horses or wagons. Inside was an elderly gentleman in Eastern clothes, asking directions to the Hayes medical practice. "I'm Thomas Hayes," Tom said, curious about this unusual visitor. The man studied him with shrewd eyes. "Then perhaps you can direct me to Dr. Margaret Sullivan Hayes. I've traveled from Boston to speak with her." Tom's protective instincts immediately heightened. "May I ask your business with my wife?" "My name is Dr. James Whitcomb from Massachusetts General Hospital." The man extended a gloved hand. "I've read Dr. Sullivan Hayes's published work on indigenous herbal treatments for respiratory ailments. Most impressive." Tom relaxed slightly, but remained watchful. Maggie's article, published under her full name 6 months earlier, had generated considerable interest in medical circles, though this was the first visitor it had brought from so far away. "I'd be happy to take you to her," Tom said. "She's seeing patients this afternoon." Dr. Whitcomb proved to be exactly what he claimed, a respected physician and medical researcher interested in Maggie's innovative combinations of traditional medical practice and indigenous remedies. He spent 2 days observing her work in the surgery, taking copious notes and asking insightful questions. In the evenings, he joined them for dinner, clearly charmed by Aita, who regarded the stranger with friendly curiosity. On his final evening in Silver Peak, after Aita had been put to bed, Dr. Whitcomb revealed the true purpose of his visit. "I've been authorized by the hospital board to offer you a position, Dr. Sullivan Hayes," he said, placing a formal letter on the table. "We're establishing a new research department focusing on integrative medicine, combining conventional treatments with traditional healing practices. We believe you would be the ideal candidate to lead this initiative." Maggie stared at the letter, speechless. Tom watched her carefully, his expression deliberately neutral despite the sudden tension in his shoulders. "This would mean returning to Boston?" Maggie asked finally. "Indeed, with a substantial salary, research assistance, and publication opportunities. Your work would reach doctors throughout the country, potentially changing treatment approaches. For thousands of patients," Dr. Whitcomb smiled encouragingly. "It's a remarkable opportunity for a woman physician, if I may say so." Maggie looked at Tom, whose eyes held a complex mixture of pride and concern. "This is unexpected," she said carefully. "I'll need time to discuss it with my husband." "Of course," Dr. Whitcomb replied. "I'll be departing tomorrow, but the offer remains open for 1 month. The hospital is quite determined to secure your expertise." After he left for his hotel, a heavy silence fell between Maggie and Tom. They moved through their evening routine without speaking, checking on Aita, banking the fire, preparing for bed, each lost in thought. Only when they were alone in the darkness of their bedroom did Tom finally speak. "You should accept," he said quietly. Maggie turned to face him, though she could barely make out his features in the dim light. "What?" "The position in Boston. You should take it." His voice was steady, but she could hear the effort it cost him. "It's an extraordinary opportunity. Your work could help countless people. Maggie sat up, lighting the small lamp beside their bed. She needed to see his face. Are you suggesting we move our family to Boston? Tom sat up as well, his expression solemn. I'm suggesting you shouldn't refuse this offer because of us. Ayita and I could join you, or you could go alone for a time if that makes more sense initially. Go without you? Without Ayita? The very idea made Maggie's chest tighten. How can you even suggest that? Because I know what it means to give up dreams for family, Tom said gently. My father wanted to see the Pacific Ocean, planned for years to make the journey west. But he stayed in the mountains because my mother's people were here, because I was young and needed stability. He never complained, but I saw the longing in his eyes sometimes, looking west. He took Maggie's hand. I don't want to see that same look in your eyes someday, wondering what might have been. Tears filled Maggie's eyes at the selflessness of his offer. Tom Hayes, if you think for one moment that I would choose Boston over you and Ayita, then you don't know me at all. It's not about choosing one over the other, he replied. It's about finding a way to have both. If that means changes for our family, we'll adapt. We always have. Maggie shook her head, a smile forming through her tears. Dr. Whitcomb came here looking for an expert in combining different healing traditions. But he doesn't understand that my knowledge comes from here, from the mountains, from your mother's wisdom passed through you, from treating miners and loggers and children in conditions Boston doctors couldn't imagine. She squeezed his hand. My work matters precisely because I'm here, not despite it. You're certain? Tom searched her face. I don't want you sacrificing your potential out of obligation. Obligation, Maggie laughed softly. Is that what you think this is? Tom, I love our life. I love our practice, our home, our community. Most of all, I love you and Ayita. That's not obligation, it's choice. The best choice I've ever made? The tension visibly left Tom's body, relief washing over his features. I would have gone, he said quietly. To Boston. For you, I would have tried. Maggie leaned forward to kiss him, touched beyond words by his willingness to uproot himself from the mountains that were as much a part of him as his own heartbeat. I know you would have. That's why I could never ask it of you. The next morning, Maggie penned a respectful letter to Dr. Whitcomb, declining his offer but proposing an alternative. A correspondence-based collaboration where she would document her treatments and findings from Silver Peak while he provided access to the hospital's research and resources. She suggested that this arrangement might actually yield more valuable results than removing her from the environment that made her. Approach unique. Dr. Whitcomb's response, which arrived by telegraph a week later, was enthusiastic acceptance. Thus began a professional partnership that would eventually lead to the publication of Mountain Medicine Integrated Approaches to Frontier Healing, a groundbreaking medical text co-authored by Drs. Whitcomb and Sullivan Hayes that would find its way into medical schools throughout the country. As the railroad construction brought more people and prosperity to Silver Peak, the Hayes family found themselves at the center of the growing community's life. Their businesses expanded to separate buildings, the medical practice now occupying the entire original structure, with the guiding service moving to larger quarters near the new rail depot. They hired additional staff, including a young female doctor from Denver who had read Maggie's publications and sought mentorship in her integrated approach. Ayita grew into a spirited child with her mother's intelligence and her father's quiet strength. By age 4, she was already accompanying Tom on short guiding expeditions around the cabin, learning the names of plants and animals in both English and Cherokee. She spent afternoons in Maggie's surgery, solemnly handing instruments to Sarah Miller and observing procedures with remarkable focus for one so young. She'll be a better doctor than either of us, Dr. Foster remarked, after watching Aita carefully organizing Maggie's herbal supplies according to a system of her own devising. Or perhaps something else entirely. That mind of hers could go anywhere. The cabin remained their true home, though they maintained comfortable quarters in town for when weather or work made the mountain journey impractical. They had added 2 rooms to the original structure, a dedicated space for Maggie's expanding research and a proper bedroom for Aita, painted sky blue at her insistence, and decorated with pine cones and interesting stones she collected on her wanderings with Tom. One crisp autumn evening, as golden aspen leaves drifted past the cabin windows, Maggie sat on the porch watching Tom teach Aita to carve a simple whistle from a willow branch. The child's face was a study in concentration, her small hands carefully following her father's guidance, her questions thoughtful and precise. Inside, a letter lay open on Maggie's desk, an invitation to present her research at a medical conference in San Francisco the following spring. Another opportunity, another decision to make, but unlike the Boston offer years before, this one filled her with quiet excitement rather than conflict. She and Tom had already discussed it, agreeing that the entire family would make the journey together, combining the conference with Aita's first view of the Pacific Ocean. As twilight deepened the shadows around the cabin, Tom looked up and met Maggie's gaze across the porch. No words were needed between them anymore. Just that look, full of shared history and understanding, was enough to convey volumes. He smiled, the same quiet smile that had first touched something deep in her heart years ago in a general store. In Silver Peak, Aita's triumphant cry broke the moment as her whistle produced its first tentative sound. Tom swept her up in congratulation, her laughter echoing across the mountainside. Maggie rose to join them, wrapping her arms around them, both feeling the solid reality of this family they had built together against all odds and expectations. Later, after Aita was tucked into bed with stories of brave mountain guides and clever healers dancing in her dreams, Maggie and Tom stood at the edge of the porch, looking out over the valley. Silver Peak's lights twinkled far below, a constellation of human endeavor against the vast wilderness. "I had a letter from Dr. Foster today," Maggie said, leaning against Tom's solid warmth. "The medical college in Denver is establishing a summer program for women interested in frontier medicine. They've asked if I would consider teaching." Tom's arm tightened around her shoulders. "You'd be excellent. Those women couldn't ask for a better teacher. It would mean dividing my time differently, perhaps closing the practice one day a week." "We'll manage," he said simply. "We always do." His confidence in her, in them, never wavered. It was the foundation upon which everything else in their life together was built, this absolute certainty that whatever challenges arose, they would face them together, each supporting the other's dreams while building their shared reality. "Do you ever wonder," Maggie asked softly, "what would have happened if Nathaniel Winters had been pleased with what he saw that day? If he had married me as planned?" Tom was quiet for a moment, considering. "I try not to dwell on might-have-beens, but I believe some souls are meant to find each other one way or another." He turned to face her fully, his eyes reflecting the emerging stars. "If not that day, perhaps another. If not in Silver Peak, then somewhere else along the trail." Maggie smiled, touching his weathered cheek, the mountain guide turning philosophical. "The mountains teach patience and perspective," he replied with a slight smile. "And you, Margaret Sullivan Hayes, have taught me about possibility, that endings can become beginnings if you're brave enough to keep walking forward." Inside the cabin, the fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light through the windows. From Aita's room came the soft sound of childish breathing, peaceful in sleep. Beyond the porch, the vast Rocky Mountains stood as they had for millennia, witnesses To countless human journeys, some tragic, some triumphant, all part of the greater story of striving and becoming. Maggie thought of the frightened, rejected woman she had been, standing alone in the snow with nowhere to go. How impossible it would have been for that woman to imagine this moment, this life, this love. Yet here she stood, a respected physician, a beloved wife, a mother, a teacher, roles she had earned through courage and determination, through refusing to allow one man's rejection to define her worth. "Come inside," she said to Tom, taking his hand. "It's getting cold." He followed willingly, as he always did and always would, into the warmth of the home they had created together. A shelter not just from mountain storms, but from life's uncertainties. A place where strength was valued and spirits soared free. A haven built by two people who had found in each other not completion, but amplification of all they already were. And if there is wisdom to be found in their story, perhaps it is this: that rejection is not an ending, but a redirection, that true partnership never diminishes, but enhances, and that the heart, like a compass, may waver in storms, but will find its true north, if we have the courage to keep following its needle through the darkest nights and the deepest snows, until we reach the home we never knew we were seeking all along. The years flowed like the mountain streams, sometimes rushing, sometimes gentle, but always moving forward. Aita's childhood unfolded against the backdrop of a changing Silver Peak. The railroad had transformed the once isolated mining town into a bustling hub of commerce and tourism. New buildings rose alongside the old, and the population swelled with settlers seeking their fortunes in both mining and the growing tourist trade. Through it all, the Hayes family remained a constant, their reputation for integrity and skill only deepening with time. Aita grew tall and straight as the pines that surrounded their cabin, with her father's observant eyes and her mother's determined chin. By her 8th birthday, she could identify more medicinal plants than most adults in town, track animals through difficult terrain, and stitch a clean wound, skills gleaned from both parents with an eagerness that delighted them. Her education was unconventional by Eastern standards, but remarkably comprehensive. She learned reading and mathematics from the town school teacher, medicine and science from her mother, survival and natural history from her father, and metalworking from Samuel Wilson, who had become a devoted mentor. "She's got a gift for seeing how things fit together," Samuel observed one afternoon, as Aita carefully shaped a small silver pendant in his workshop. "Doesn't just look at what something is, but what it could become." Maggie watched her daughter's intense concentration with a mixture of pride and wonder. "She reminds me so much of Tom sometimes, that same quiet focus. And other times she's all you," Samuel replied with a chuckle, "especially when she's arguing with young Robert about the correct way to splint a broken arm." The mention of Robert Wilson, now 19 and Tom's full partner in the guiding business, brought a thoughtful expression to Maggie's face. The young man had grown into a capable guide with a steady manner that inspired confidence in clients. He had also developed an obvious admiration for the Hayes family, particularly their precocious daughter, who treated him with the frank imperiousness of a child who had always been taken seriously by adults. "Robert's good with her," Maggie acknowledged. "Patient, even when she's challenging his every word." "My boy says she'll be running the whole town someday," Samuel said with obvious pride in both his son and his honorary niece. Probably right, too. As Aita approached her 10th year, Maggie and Tom faced difficult decisions about her future education. The Silver Peak School was adequate for basic learning, but couldn't provide the advanced instruction Aita's quick mind required. Towns with better educational facilities existed, but they were distant enough to make daily travel impractical. "We could send her to the boarding school in Denver," Tom suggested one evening as they discussed options. "Dr. Foster knows the Headmistress says it's a good place for bright girls. Maggie frowned, the idea of separation from their daughter creating a hollow feeling in her chest. She's so young still. Younger than you were when you left home to make your way. Tom reminded her gently, younger than I was when my father first took me into the high country for a full season of trapping. That's different, we had no choice. Tom's expression softened. And that's the gift we've given her, choices, options we never had. He took Maggie's hand. I don't want to send her away either, but we need to consider what's best for her future, not just what comforts our hearts. The decision was unexpectedly resolved by the arrival of a letter from the University of Colorado. Dr. James Whitcomb, who had maintained his professional correspondence with Maggie over the years, had accepted a position as a visiting professor and wrote to inform her that the university was establishing a summer science program for exceptional students, regardless of age or gender. He had submitted Aita's name based on Maggie's descriptions of her daughter's abilities. They want her to attend for 8 weeks this summer, Maggie told Tom, reading the letter with growing excitement. Studying natural sciences, anatomy, even basic chemistry. Dr. Whitcomb will personally oversee her participation. She looked up, eyes bright. We wouldn't be sending her away permanently, just for the summer term, and we could visit her in Boulder. Relief washed over Tom's features, a perfect compromise. When they presented the opportunity to Aita, her reaction was immediate and emphatic enthusiasm. Real laboratories with microscopes and chemical equipment. Her eyes widened with possibilities. Will there be other students my age? Probably not many, Maggie admitted. Most will be older, but Dr. Whitcomb believes you're ready, and so do we. Aita threw her arms around both parents. Thank you. I promise I'll work harder than anyone there. Watching their daughter's joy, Maggie and Tom exchanged glances over her head, their silent communication perfected over years of partnership. This was right. This was the path forward. The summer of Aita's departure arrived with startling swiftness. Tom personally escorted her to Boulder, ensuring she was comfortably settled before returning to Silver Peak. The house felt eerily quiet without her energetic presence. No questions punctuating the dinner conversation, no footsteps running. Between the surgery and Tom's workshop, no impromptu singing drifting from her bedroom. Maggie threw herself into her practice, accepting more patients and extending her hours. Tom led longer expeditions into the high country, sometimes staying away for several days at a stretch. They both waited eagerly for Aita's letters, which arrived weekly, filled with excited descriptions of experiments, new friends, despite being years younger than her fellow students, and praise from her instructors. Professor Whitcomb says, I have a natural aptitude for microscopy, she wrote in one letter. I identified 3 distinct fungi specimens that even the older students confused. He says Mother's careful training is evident in my observational skills. The letter continued with detailed drawings of the fungi and notes on their properties, scholarly information interspersed with childish enthusiasm about the university's enormous library and the ice cream parlor where students gathered on Sundays. When Tom and Maggie traveled to Boulder midsummer to visit their daughter, they found her thriving. She had grown an inch, her skin had tanned from outdoor fieldwork, and she spoke with new confidence, using scientific terminology with easy familiarity. More surprisingly, she had formed a close friendship with the university president's daughter, a quiet girl 2 years her senior who shared Aita's passion for botanical studies. Elizabeth's father says I can return next summer for the advanced program if my work continues to be exemplary, Aita informed them over dinner at a restaurant that seemed impossibly grand after Silver Peak's humble establishments. And when I'm 16, I could apply for early admission to the university itself. Tom and Maggie exchanged glances, realizing their daughter was mapping a future far beyond Silver Peak's boundaries. Pride mingled with a touch of melancholy, the inevitability of children growing beyond their parents' worlds. "We'll discuss all possibilities," Maggie promised, unwilling to either commit to or dismiss plans that were still years away. "For now, we're simply proud of what you're accomplishing this summer." Ayita's return to Silver Peak at summer's end brought both joy and adjustment. She had changed subtly, still their beloved daughter, but with new perspectives and ideas that sometimes challenged the routines of their mountain life. She had acquired a taste for academic discussion and occasionally expressed frustration with the limitations of their remote location. "The library here doesn't have a single book on cellular theory," she complained one afternoon, storming into Maggie's surgery with uncharacteristic impatience. "How am I supposed to continue my research?" Maggie looked up from the patient file. She was updating. "The same way I've conducted my research for years, through correspondence, occasional travel, and making the most of available resources." She studied her daughter's frustrated expression. "The world doesn't deliver everything we need to our doorstep, Ayita. Sometimes we have to seek it out or create it ourselves." The gentle rebuke had its intended effect. Ayita's expression softened from indignation to thoughtfulness. "Like you did when you came west. Like both your father and I have done our entire lives," Maggie confirmed. "There are advantages to cities and universities, certainly, but there's value too in learning to work with limitations and find creative solutions." Ayita considered this, then nodded slowly. "I could write to Professor Whitcomb about sending specific books and perhaps start my own research collection." "An excellent beginning," Maggie agreed, pleased by her daughter's quick pivot from frustration to solution. That autumn, as golden aspen leaves carpeted the trails around their cabin, Ayita began spending more time with Robert Wilson, who had recently returned from guiding a scientific expedition through Yellowstone. The young man had brought back geological samples and detailed maps that fascinated Ayita, and he patiently answered her endless questions about thermal features and wildlife observations. "Robert says women are being hired as field scientists now," Ayita announced at dinner one evening. "Not many, but some. The Smithsonian even sent a female botanist with the Yellowstone expedition." Tom nodded, unsurprised by his daughter's interest. "Science is finally recognizing that keen minds come in all forms. Your mother helped pave that path." Maggie smiled at the pride in her husband's voice. "Many women helped pave it, including some who receive far less recognition than I have. But yes, opportunities are expanding." She looked at her daughter curiously. "Is that something you're considering? Field science?" Ayita twirled her fork thoughtfully. "Maybe. I like medicine too. And Robert says I have better instincts for weather patterns than most guides he's known." She grinned suddenly. "Perhaps I'll do all three." "With your determination, I wouldn't be surprised," Tom said affectionately. As Ayita grew into her teen years, returning to Boulder each summer for increasingly advanced programs, the pattern of their family life adjusted to accommodate her expanding horizons. The Hayes cabin gained a dedicated study room filled with books and specimens, many sent by Dr. Whitcomb or acquired during family trips to Denver. Tom built specialized shelving for Ayita's growing collection of rocks, plants, and scientific equipment, while Maggie arranged for academic journals to be delivered with the regular mail. Silver Peak itself was changing too. The original mining operations were declining as veins played out, but tourism and commerce had more than compensated. The town now boasted a proper hotel, a photography studio that specialized in wilderness, portraits, and several shops selling local crafts to visitors. Hayes' medical practice had expanded to include 2 additional doctors trained in Maggie's integrated approach, while the guiding service employed 6 full-time guides, during the busy summer months. When Aita turned 15, an unexpected visitor arrived in Silver Peak, Catherine Hayes' brother James Blackwood, whom Tom had not seen since before his wife's death. Now an elderly man with silver hair and Catherine's direct gaze, he had traveled from Tennessee after learning of Tom's remarriage and the existence of his niece through a chance encounter with a former Silver Peak miner. "I should have come years ago," he admitted as they sat on the cabin porch, the awkwardness of their reunion softening with each passing hour. After Catherine and Lily died, it was too painful to maintain connections, a failing on my part. Tom nodded understanding. Grief takes us down different trails. No judgment here. James watched Aita as she worked in the herb garden, carefully harvesting plants for Maggie's remedies. "She has Catherine's profile," he observed softly. "Something in the way she holds her head." "Yes," Tom agreed. "We've seen it too." The visit proved healing for all of them. James shared stories of Catherine's childhood that Tom had never heard, brought family heirlooms that rightfully belonged to Aita as Catherine's only living descendant, and listened with evident pride to accounts of his niece's academic achievements and future prospects. Before departing, he presented Aita with a leather-bound journal filled with botanical drawings and notes created by her grandmother, Tom's Cherokee mother, and later expanded by Catherine. "This belongs in your hands now," he told her. 3 generations of knowledge, waiting for the 4th to add her discoveries. The gift touched Aita deeply. Though she had grown up surrounded by reminders of the grandmother and half-sister she had never known, this direct connection to her heritage seemed to satisfy something in her spirit. She began adding her own observations to the journal, creating a living document that bridged past and future. As Aita's 16th birthday approached, bringing with it the possibility of early university admission that she had mentioned years before, Maggie and Tom faced the reality of their daughter's impending departure from their daily lives. They had always known this day would come, had prepared for it, encouraged the development that made it inevitable, yet the prospect still created a hollow ache. "We could move to Boulder," Tom suggested one night as they lay awake discussing options, "or at least maintain a second home there. The guiding business could expand to the Boulder area. There's plenty of demand for experienced mountain guides." Maggie turned to face him in the darkness. "You would leave the cabin, your mountains? They're just places, Maggie. You and Aita are home." His voice was steady, but she could hear the cost of such an offer. This mountain, this particular valley, they were woven into the fabric of Tom's being, had been his sanctuary through grief and joy alike. "No," she said firmly, "we're not uprooting our entire lives. Aita needs to spread her wings, not worry about her aging parents following her to university." She touched his face gently. "Besides, Boulder is not so far. We'll visit often and she'll return for holidays and summers." The decision was ultimately simplified by Aita herself, who announced at breakfast one morning that she had been corresponding with the university administration about a unique arrangement. "They've agreed to a modified attendance plan," she explained, eyes bright with excitement. "I'll live on campus during intensive study periods, about 5 months of the year, then return to Silver Peak for the remainder, continuing my studies through independent research and correspondence." She looked between her parents anxiously. "Professor Whitcomb helped arrange it. He says it's unprecedented but appropriate given my circumstances and abilities." Relief and pride mingled in Maggie's response. "That sounds like an ideal solution." "You're certain it's what you want?" Tom asked carefully. "Not just an accommodation for our benefit?" Aita shook her head firmly. "It's genuinely what I want. I love Boulder and the university, but Silver Peak is home. My research interests bridge both worlds." She smiled suddenly. "Besides, Robert has promised to teach me advanced mountaineering techniques whenever I'm home." He says a field scientist needs to reach places others can't. The mention of Robert Wilson, now 25 and widely respected throughout the region for his guiding expertise, brought knowing looks to both parents' faces. The childhood friendship between Robert and Ayita had evolved into something neither Tom nor Maggie could quite define. Not quite romantic, but certainly charged with mutual admiration and a deep connection that went beyond shared interests. "Robert's a good man," Tom said neutrally. "Fine teacher for those skills." Ayita flushed slightly at her father's tone, but continued with determined enthusiasm about her educational plans, the conversation shifting to practical matters of university fees and travel arrangements. Later, when Ayita had left to assist, in the surgery, Tom turned to Maggie with a raised eyebrow. "Robert Wilson." Maggie smiled. "She's 16, Tom. Friends and admirations are natural at her age. Samuel's already dropped hints about his son's intentions once she's older." Tom's expression was complicated, protective father warring with deep respect for both young people in question. "Then we'll address that when the time comes," Maggie said practically. "Ayita has her mother's good sense and her father's steady judgment. We've raised her to make sound decisions about her life and heart." Tom nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth in her words, even as the father in him struggled with the idea of his daughter's emerging adulthood. "Catherine would say, 'I'm being ridiculous.'" "Catherine would be right," Maggie teased gently. "As wives generally are." His laugh broke the tension, and they returned to discussing the more immediate logistics of Ayita's university arrangement. The years that followed unfolded with a new rhythm for the Hayes family. Ayita's presence became seasonal, intense periods of homecoming, followed by months of absence, filled with detailed letters describing her studies and experiences. She thrived in the university environment, earning recognition from professors and fellow students alike for her unique perspective and rigorous approach to scientific inquiry. During her time in Silver Peak, she divided her attention between assisting in Maggie's practice, accompanying Tom or Robert on carefully selected guiding expeditions, and conducting her own field research in the surrounding mountains. Her independence grew with each passing year, yet so did her appreciation for the foundation her parents had built, both the physical home that welcomed her returns and the values that shaped her approach to the world. Maggie and Tom found their own lives shifting and expanding in response to Ayita's more independent path. Maggie finally accepted an invitation to lecture at medical colleges throughout the Western states, her integrated approach to medicine now widely respected in professional circles. Tom, with Robert increasingly managing day-to-day operations of the guiding service, undertook a long-planned expedition to map remote areas of the Continental Divide, combining his intimate knowledge of the mountains with formal cartographic techniques. "We're entering a new season," Maggie observed on their 20th wedding anniversary, as they sat beside the fire in the cabin that had witnessed so much of their shared story. "Not an ending, but a transition." Tom nodded, his hand finding hers with the easy familiarity of decades. Like the mountains in autumn, still vital, just changing form. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, the first dusting of winter transforming the familiar landscape. Tomorrow, Ayita would arrive from Boulder for her winter break, bringing her energy and stories back into their daily lives for a time. The season would pass, as all seasons did, giving way to new patterns and possibilities. Maggie leaned against Tom's solid warmth, thinking of the frightened, rejected woman who had once stood alone on a snowy platform in Silver Peak, and the remarkable journey that had unfolded from that moment of despair. How strange and wonderful that life's deepest disappointments could become doorways to its greatest joys, if only one had the courage to keep moving forward, to remain true to one's essential self, even when others failed to see its value. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, about writing our story, not just the medical research, but the personal journey, for Ayita and perhaps for others who might find courage in it. Tom considered this thoughtfully. The story of a mail order. Bride who found her place not in marriage, but in her own strength, and then found marriage anyway, on her own terms. Something like that, Maggie smiled, though your part in it is hardly incidental. I would read such a story, he said simply, especially if it captured how a mountain guide who thought his heart was buried with his first family discovered it still had room to grow. They sat in comfortable silence as the fire crackled and snow continued to fall, each reflecting on the long, unexpected path that had brought them to this moment. Outside, the mountains stood eternal witness to human journeys, to endings that became beginnings, to strength that emerged from vulnerability, and to the quiet revolutionary power of being valued precisely for who you are, no more and no less. And if the stars above Silver Peak shone particularly brightly that night, perhaps they were simply acknowledging what Tom and Maggie Hayes had long since discovered: that true love never diminishes us. It expands us, elevates us, and gives us the courage to become our fullest selves. Not through dramatic declarations or grand gestures, but through the steady daily choice to see each other clearly and stand together against whatever storms may come. The sun rose over Silver Peak on a clear autumn morning, casting long shadows across the town that had grown from a rough mining settlement into a prosperous community. Maggie Hayes stood on the front porch of the clinic, watching as people moved along the now paved main street. 25 years had passed since she had first arrived as a rejected mail-order bride, and both she and the town had transformed in ways neither could have imagined. At 57, Maggie's hair had silvered elegantly, fine lines marking her face as evidence of a life filled with laughter and purpose. Her medical practice had become an institution, drawing patients and medical students from across the western states. The modest clinic had expanded into the Hayes Medical Institute, a two-story building housing examination rooms, a research laboratory, and teaching spaces where Maggie trained a new generation of frontier doctors in her integrated approach to medicine. Tom, approaching 60 but still remarkably fit from a lifetime in the mountains, had gradually stepped back from daily guiding to focus on map-making and writing the definitive guidebooks to the region. His detailed trail maps and wilderness manuals were considered essential equipment for anyone venturing into the high country, and his reputation as a conservation advocate had spread far beyond Colorado. This particular morning held special significance. The town council had declared it Hayes Day in honor of their contributions to Silver Peak's development, and the celebration would culminate in the dedication of the new public library, a handsome stone building funded largely by proceeds from Maggie's medical texts and Tom's guidebooks. "Ready for your speech?" Tom asked, appearing in the doorway behind her, still cutting an impressive figure with his silver beard and weathered features. Maggie smiled, reaching back to take his hand without turning. "As ready as I'll ever be. Public speaking still isn't my favorite activity," says the woman who lectures at medical colleges throughout the country, he teased gently. "That's different. Those are medical topics, not personal reflections." She turned to face him, straightening. His collar with the easy intimacy of decades together. "Is everything prepared at the house for after the ceremony?" Tom nodded. "Martha's granddaughters are handling the arrangements. The garden looks beautiful." Their cabin had long since been expanded into a comfortable home, though they had carefully preserved its original rooms and character. The surrounding land now featured extensive gardens where Maggie grew medicinal plants, a workshop where Tom taught wilderness skills to local youth, and a small guest house for visiting researchers and family. Family. The word brought a warm glow to Maggie's heart. Their daughter, Ayita, now 32, had forged a remarkable path. After completing her education at the University of Colorado and further studies at Harvard, she had become one of the country's foremost ethnobotanists, documenting indigenous, medicinal practices throughout the Americas. Her work combined Tom's heritage and knowledge of native plants with Maggie's medical expertise, creating a legacy that honored both while establishing her own distinct contribution to science. And then there was Robert Wilson. After years of friendship that gradually deepened into love, he and Ayita had married in a ceremony held on the mountainside above the Hayes cabin. Robert had continued to expand the guiding business while supporting Ayita's research expeditions, often accompanying her into remote regions where his wilderness skills proved invaluable. Their partnership echoed Tom and Maggie's in its mutual respect and shared purpose, though expressed in their own unique way. The sound of an automobile, still something of a novelty in the mountain town, drew Maggie's attention back to the present. A sleek black Ford pulled up in front of the clinic, and Ayita stepped out, elegant in a tailored traveling suit, her dark hair swept up beneath a fashionable hat. Behind her came Robert, still moving with a guide's easy grace despite his formal attire, and then Maggie's heart quickened, a small figure in a blue dress, their granddaughter, Catherine. "Grandma!" the 6-year-old called, breaking free from her parents to race toward the porch. Maggie knelt to receive the enthusiastic embrace, breathing in the child's scent of sunshine and sweet soap. "Hello, my darling," she murmured. "You've grown at least an inch since spring." 2 inches, Catherine corrected seriously. Papa measured me on the door frame. She turned to Tom with equal enthusiasm. "Grandpa, did you finish my walking stick? You promised it would be ready for our expedition." Tom's face creased in a smile. "Indeed, I did. It's waiting in my workshop, carved with eagles just as you requested." Ayita and Robert joined them on the porch, the family exchanging warm greetings and catching up on the weeks since their last visit. Though they maintained their own home in Denver, where Ayita's research was based at the university, they returned to Silver Peak frequently, ensuring Catherine grew up connected to her roots in the mountain community. "The botanical garden curator sends his regards, Mother," Ayita said as they moved inside. "Your latest shipment of high-altitude medicinal specimens arrived safely. He's particularly excited about the alpine yarrow variants." "And how was the conference?" Maggie asked, leading them into the sitting room where refreshments waited. "Transformative." Ayita's eyes lit with professional passion so reminiscent of her mother's. 3 indigenous healing practitioners presented alongside university researchers. The kind of collaboration you and Father have advocated for decades is finally gaining wider acceptance. As the adults conversed, Catherine explored the clinic with the familiarity of frequent visits, examining specimens under the teaching microscope Tom had given Maggie for their 20th anniversary. The child already showed signs of inheriting both the Hayes curiosity about the natural world and the analytical mind that had served both her grandmother and mother so well in their scientific pursuits. The library dedication that afternoon drew the entire town. From the platform erected before the new building, Maggie looked out over familiar faces, patients she had treated, children she had delivered now grown with families of their own, longtime friends and colleagues who had shared their journey. In the front row sat Tom, Ayita, Robert and Catherine, 4 generations of a family that had begun with rejection and found its way to profound belonging. "When I first arrived in Silver Peak," Maggie began, her voice clear in the mountain air, "I thought I was coming to fulfill someone else's expectations of who I should be. Instead, I found the freedom to become fully myself." She glanced at Tom, who nodded encouragement. "This town gave me what everyone ultimately seeks, not just acceptance, but the chance to contribute meaningfully, to build something lasting. As she spoke of their shared history, the mining accidents that had first established her medical skills, the gradual growth of trust between townspeople and the unconventional female doctor, the partnerships that had developed between traditional Western medicine and indigenous healing practices, Maggie saw recognition in the eyes of those who had lived this story alongside her. This library, she continued, gesturing to the sandstone building behind her, represents our belief that knowledge belongs to everyone, that wisdom comes from many sources, and that a community thrives when it values both innovation and tradition. She smiled at Catherine, who was listening with uncharacteristic stillness. It is our gift to the future generations of Silver Peak, who will write their own stories in the shadow of these mountains that have taught us so much about resilience and adaptation. The celebration continued into evening, with music and dancing. In the town square, as twilight softened the mountain edges, Tom found Maggie standing slightly apart, watching their granddaughter dance with local children around a maypole erected for the occasion. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, slipping his arm around her waist in a gesture unchanged by the passing decades. "I was thinking about Nathaniel Winters," Maggie admitted. Tom's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Now, there's a name I haven't heard in many years." "I saw his obituary in the Denver paper last month," Maggie explained. "He died in New York, apparently quite wealthy, but alone. No family mentioned, no legacy beyond his business holdings." She leaned against Tom's solid presence. "I find myself feeling oddly grateful to him." "Grateful to the man who rejected you and tried to drive you from town?" Maggie nodded thoughtfully. "His rejection was the first step on this path that has brought so much joy and purpose. If he had been kinder that day, if he had seen beyond his narrow expectations." She glanced at Aita, who was now dancing with Robert while Catherine clapped in delight. "None of this would exist. Not our daughter, not our granddaughter, not the clinic or the guides we've trained or the books we've written." Tom was quiet, for a moment considering her words. Life's trails are strange that way. The hardest paths often lead to the finest views. Indeed, Maggie turned to face him fully, taking in the familiar features that had aged alongside her own. The deepened laugh lines around his eyes, the silver of his once dark beard, the steady gaze that had never wavered in its appreciation of her true self. "Would you do it all again? Knowing everything, the struggles, the hard winters, the times we nearly lost everything?" "In a heartbeat," Tom replied without hesitation. "Every step, Maggie, every single one." The music shifted to a slower melody, and Tom extended his hand in invitation. Though they rarely danced publicly, tonight seemed to call for it. As they moved together beneath the stars, Maggie remembered another dance long ago, their first at the spring harvest dance, when the town was watching to see if the mountain guide would publicly acknowledge the rejected bride he had taken in. "We've come a long way from that first dance," she murmured. Tom's hand tightened on hers. "Not so far. I was falling in love with you then, and I'm still falling now. Just been a longer dance than most." Later that night, after the guests had departed and Catherine had been tucked into bed in the room that had once been her mother's, the family gathered on the porch of the Hayes home. The valley stretched below them, Silver Peak's lights twinkling against the darkness like earthbound stars. "I've received an invitation to lead a research expedition to the Amazon next spring," Aita said, curled beside Robert on the porch swing. 6 months documenting healing practices of riverine communities." "That sounds like an extraordinary opportunity," Maggie responded, though her heart tightened at the thought of such a long separation. "It is," Aita agreed. "But we've been discussing alternatives." She exchanged glances with Robert. "The university has suggested I consider writing a comprehensive text on comparative healing traditions, beginning with those closest to home." the Colorado Rockies to start, Robert explained, then expanding outward in phases. It would mean basing ourselves here in Silver Peak for at least the first year. Joy blossomed in Maggie's chest. You'd be moving back? All of you? Ayita nodded, her expression softening. Catherine should know this place is more than just a visit. She should experience the mountains through the seasons, learn the plants as they grow, not just from specimens and books. She reached for her mother's hand. And she should have daily time with her grandparents, absorbing your wisdom directly, as I did. The decision felt like a circle completing, not an ending, but a continuation. The knowledge that had passed, from Tom's Cherokee mother to Catherine to Maggie, and then to Ayita, would now flow to young Catherine, enriched by each generation's contributions. As the night deepened around them, stars emerging in familiar constellations above the peaks, Maggie thought about the many women who had come west seeking new beginnings, some finding joy, others heartbreak, all forever changed by the journey. Her own path had begun in rejection, but led to this moment of profound belonging, surrounded by family, in a community that valued her precisely for the qualities once deemed unsuitable. There was wisdom in that journey worth preserving, worth sharing with others who might find themselves standing alone, wondering if their strength was a liability rather than their greatest asset. Perhaps that would be her final contribution, the story of a woman who refused to diminish herself to meet others' expectations and found, in that refusal, her true path forward. Tom's hand found hers in the darkness, its warmth familiar and steadying. No words were needed between them now, just that touch, speaking volumes about shared history and enduring connection. Together they had built something neither could have created alone, each becoming more fully themselves through their life together. And if there is a lesson in their story, perhaps it is simply this: that rejection is sometimes a gift, redirecting us from where we think we should be to where we truly belong. That the qualities others find challenging may be precisely those the world needs most. And that love, real love, never asks us to be less, only invites us to become more, with the precious certainty that we are valued exactly as we are. Up. Next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.